Welcome. How many of you have been around and seen some or all of the balances by show of hands? Okay, good amount of you. I recognize a few of your faces. I was out earlier kind of rebalancing some fallen pieces. If you haven't yet, I'm sure you will at some point. Go have a look. And in this presentation tonight, I am highlighting a few pieces from the show. So you'll at least get to see those in the meantime. So I have to start with some thank yous. Of course, goes without saying, Bach Tower founders for this amazing place for us all to enjoy. And for me to be able to create art is just surreal to be here. It's such an honor to have such a beautiful place to exhibit my work. So I really want to pay homage and thank the founders. I thought a lot about them and what the time they spent here at this property 100 years ago. And that was a big inspiration for me when creating the art for this show. And then, of course, the current team, everyone at the Bach Tower Gardens team, they've all been amazing. I've worked with the horticulturists, the marketing folks, the gift shop people, photographers, digital content team. I've mixed with just about every team at the gardens, and they've all been amazing, so I want to thank them. Of course, you patrons, without patrons coming to see art, you can't really call it art. If I just did this in my yard for only me to see, no one would ever know about it, and it would never be an art form. You know, in order to be art, I think it has to be seen by people. So thank you all for coming to see the gardens and see my art. Of course, my wife and daughter, they've been very patient through different times when I've had to be away setting up shows and for days at a time. So I want to thank them for their support. And then other friends and family, my dad, and mom and everyone else who's supported me over the years. And then, of course, nature for all its wonders. My art is very closely tied to nature, and without nature's wonders, I couldn't create this art form. So I thank nature for that. So here's kind of a breakdown of today's presentation. Just to give you a heads up, I'm going to try to keep it 30-ish minutes or so. I know there's a concert at 7 up at the tower. Some of you folks might be anxious to go see. So I'm going to try to finish in time for you all to be able to go do that. So we'll go over an introduction of the show. I'll introduce the art of stone balancing to you. Chances are you haven't seen it. Chances are even more slim you haven't seen it in an exhibit setting like this, because I'm one of the only artists who are doing this type of art for an exhibit fashion. My story in stone, how I got started doing art, and how I got started particularly working with stones. Some of my inspirations and influences. And then we're going to take kind of a closer look at the show, and I'll highlight a couple pieces in the show and tell you how I created them. And then through this show, I believe a new art form has been born, which is exciting. So I'll talk more about that. And then at the last part's my favorite part, converse. Keep in mind any questions. I enjoy conversing and dialogue about my art and nature and things. So anything you want to ask me, please feel free to when I'm finished, okay? All right, cool. So this is an introduction to the show. A lot of you probably already know, but there is a map with 25 locations of my stone balances throughout the gardens. Don't forget there are 5 down in the pond back behind El Retiro. They're in the middle of the pond, which has its own story, which I'll tell you later. And they are all true balances. So when I create my art, I'm using only stones, and in this case, I made my own stones, which I'll tell you more about later as well. I'm using nothing but stones and my hands, so I'm not using any supports, any glue, any rods, anything. I make sure I have a sturdy base, and then the rest is just pure balance. Everything I do on top of that is balance. So it's one of the rarest art forms today, but it didn't always used to be so rare. the history of stone balancing dates back many thousands of years, over many hundreds, many thousands of civilizations. And I'm going to highlight 7 of them here to kind of give you an introduction into some very early records of stone balancing. The Inuit people of Arctic North America used to make these gigantic structures. It's unknown what they made them for, but still today you can go see them all over the Arctic. And a lot of people think there was some sort of a shrine or altar, but there are many, many, many of these. And essentially what it is upright stones, a big stone on top, and 2 stones balanced on top. So these are not connected, they're just purely balanced. One of the clearest signs of early stone balancing is the Aboriginal Australians who made these arrangements, and again, nobody knows what they did these for, but they're these gigantic, some of these weigh a ton or more. They're gigantic boulders, stood upright with stones balanced on top. The Mani stones were used as a text. They were balanced and then written on, and this was used as a very early version of a book, but one that would withstand time. I've been stone balancing for over 23 years or so, and I've come across lots of examples of stones balancing throughout history. I was most surprised by the stone balancing in Europe. Most of us have heard of Stonehenge, probably all of us have, but there's actually 35,000 ancient stone monuments across Europe where you can go find examples of Stonehenge type structures where there's gigantic stones balanced on top of one another. And I just found that really fascinating. Some of them dating back many thousands of years. Last 3 here. This site in Turkey is the oldest example that we know of one of the oldest examples we know of balanced stones. And it comprised of these gigantic pillars, a couple stories tall, with these other rocks that were kind of precariously placed on top. And it was thought that they had some sort of a structure over this at one point. But this was buried for thousands of years, and just in the last decade or so, they've been uncovering this site. This is what's known as the tropical Stonehenge, and this was an astrological marker. If you can look right there and see that hole, at a certain time of year, it's actually I think it's the winter solstice. The sun travels through that hole through this channel from this horizon and goes through that hole only on one day, and it's to mark the winter solstice. And that's thought to be over 3,000 years old. This I also thought was really fascinating. These Wasu stone circles in Gambia, there's 17,000 of these monuments across Gambia alone. Stones weighing 7 tons or more. And ever since their creation, people going by them have placed and balanced smaller stones on top. This still happens to this day. So it's kind of a ritual thing in Gambia. I've shown you 7 examples. I have read about and learned about hundreds. There are so many examples of ancient stone balancing. So where is it at today? There's very few of us stone balancers today, and even fewer of them showing in public settings. It's very much kind of you do it in the wild kind of art form. So it's a really unique opportunity to do it in a place like Bach Gardens where people will get to see it and enjoy it. I believe that it should be done where people can see it, because a big part of my art is bridging the gap between humans and nature. And I feel like my art attempts to do that, to kind of bridge the gap between us and nature. My art's very connected to nature. I have to be very, very in tune to nature when I'm creating this art. If I'm distracted by the outer world in any fashion, the balances are very difficult to do. I have to be very connected to nature. So that's a big part of my art. So how did I get started doing this? This is a picture of my grandpa, and behind my grandpa is a stone cabin that he built. He actually built 2 of these cabins. And my grandpa lived to be 98 and was an amazing man. But as a kid, he would bring stones and rocks to my school, and he would do a rock show for my school growing up. And he would show us all the different cool things rocks can do. They can glow in the dark. Some of them are hard, some are soft, some are crazy colors, some are valuable, some, all these different qualities. And that was kind of the first time that I started looking at rocks as more than just something laying on the ground to not pay much mind to. I started looking at rocks as being something more. And I think that's where my early appreciation was instilled for the medium I use now, which is stones. I started out kind of being just a stacker of stones. There's a difference between stacking and balancing. Stacking is pretty common. You might see them along waterways, and you might see them on social media or something. People kind of do little stacks. And throughout human history, those stacks have meant different things. They've been trail markers. They've been little shrines. They've been altars. They've been all sorts of things. Pilgrims stacked them in the windows of their homes. Or early American settlers stacked them in the windows of their homes. Things like that. But balancing is a very different art form. Balancing is when you're taking a stone and you're trying to place it at an unnatural angle. Stacking, they're all naturally going to kind of lay against one another in that fashion. But if I took any one of these and put it on end and then stack the rest on top of that, then that would become a balance. So there's a big difference between stacking and balancing. But that's how I started out, just kind of stacking them. It wasn't until the trip to Alaska when I kind of had this moment of equilibrium when I was playing with stones, and I got one to stand on its edge, and I felt the moment of equilibrium is what I call it. It's when the stone locked, I stood back, looked at it, and said, this stone shouldn't be standing like that, but in fact it is standing right in front of me. And that's when I kind of got hooked on balancing. From that point on, I kind of went pretty wild with it and started doing some really cool projects, one of which was going into the center of Times Square in New York and collecting trash from all around Times Square and bringing it into the center of Times Square during rush hour and creating pure balance and equilibrium in the most chaotic place you can imagine. And that was very symbolic to me of the fact that nature and balance and equilibrium can be anywhere. If I can do it in Times Square, it can exist anywhere. And I think that's a great metaphor for all of our thinking, that we have the ability to center and balance ourselves in trying moments, right? Or in chaotic moments. That's a big part of my art form. So then I just started doing balances everywhere. My very first time showing my balance in a public setting was at a small garden center, and I just did one day, and I made all these kind of cool balances using stones they had actually just in their garden center. And that was kind of the first time I did it publicly, and that was probably about 20 years ago, maybe more. And then I started just doing it anytime I went on a trip. This was in San Francisco, and there was a little fountain down below this, and as I pulled rocks out of the fountain, I balanced them in that fashion. I did a lot of balancing in Fiji, which is me up there balancing in Fiji. And then I started experimenting with other materials like bricks, building materials. This was a job site. I walked by and saw 2 bricks laying there and balanced them like that. This is some more balance work I did in San Francisco and Alaska. And then I started bringing the balancing into my studio and trying to kind of challenge myself and see what the limits are of my ability to balance things. And I started balancing things like dice and bowling balls. And this was actually one of the most challenging balances I've ever created. And it's, as you can see, a oversized light bulb. But that's balanced on this beam with 3 golf balls balanced on top of the light bulb. And a lot of people think that because there's grooves in a golf ball, it'll balance easily, but the corresponding dimples down here don't match to the corresponding dimple you want it to up there. So it's actually really challenging to balance golf balls. Just try it. Anyway, next time you're golfing, try to balance a couple up and see how that works. So today, coming into current time with my art form, this is my third kind of full-scale exhibit in the Botanic Gardens, and I'm really thrilled and excited about bringing my art to more people. And to my knowledge, it's the first time that this type of art has been shown in this type of setting, which is really cool. And I mentioned earlier, kind of that moment when I looked at that stone and I said, this shouldn't exist, but it in fact exists. And that's a big part of my art. As you're walking through looking at the pieces, I kind of challenge you to spend a moment with it and think about what's happening. A lot of times they look kind of natural, like, oh yeah, that's meant to be there. But if you really look at it, there's something happening there that isn't quite, shouldn't exist, but in fact you're looking at it existing. And I think when you do that, you kind of open up your mind to new possibilities, and that's a big part of what I am trying to convey through my art right now. It's also one of the only fleeting art forms. A balance in this show or a balance I do anywhere else might last for 1 second. I had a balance this morning that I walked away from and I heard a thud as I took 2 steps away. That same balance that I just redid out there might last for a month or longer the second time. It's really a fleeting art form, and I think there's something about that. I think you kind of have your opportunity to see it, and I think that's what gravitates some people to it, consciously or subconsciously. You got to see it while it's there, But to that point, any pieces that fall during the show, I come regularly and rebalance. And I like to do it kind of different each time, so there's something new to look at. And I kind of just trust how the rocks fall. It's how I put them back up, that it's meant to be a new piece. So, speaking of the fleeting art form, most other art forms are meant to last. We do paintings with archival paint on archival canvases, and we store them. We put archival finishes on them. We do everything to make our art last a long time. And that's the same for sculptures, drawings, photographs, anything. This art form, like I mentioned, might last for seconds. And I think there's something really kind of cool and unique about that. So talking about my influences, I wasn't meant to be an artist. I wasn't supposed to be an artist. I was supposed to be a professional basketball player. And I was on that path, and I was going to make it. Last night, I shared earlier, I had a dream that I did make it, and I was hanging out with all my NBA heroes, and I was on the team. Oddly enough, that was just last night. But when I was 16, I broke my back playing basketball, and I couldn't do much of anything. I couldn't go up or down stairs. I couldn't really do much of anything for about 18 months. And during that time, my uncle, Michael, here in the green, passed away. It was within a very short time of both things happening. And he left me a little note and left me some of his paintbrushes. And that's when I had done art before, and I enjoyed art before, but that wasn't until that time I did like my first piece of fine art, or my first piece of art when I was 16, where I really spent time, and I spent months making a painting. And I had a lot of passion, I had a lot of time, and a lot of pent-up energy that I usually release through sports that I couldn't anymore. So that's when I started creating art. So without that influence and that circumstance in my life, I certainly would not be up here talking about my art to you all. So I'm grateful for that. And this is some of my Uncle Michael's paintings. He was a fabulous painter. He also showed me that you can do art. You can be an artist. It was a thing. There's people who create art, and that's what they do. And that was really inspiring to me. My daughter here, sitting here, she is very inspiring to me. She's a very prolific artist. She's always creating. Sometimes when I'm tired, I've been lifting heavy stones and I'm doing something, I just want to kind of veg out. She's sitting over there drawing, and it motivates me to get back into some planning or get back into some sketching or do something. So she's very much a motivator and influence for me. And my wife, sitting next to her, she's always supportive, always pushing me, always motivating me. And so she's been a big influence as well. This is my high school art teacher. He gave me the license to kind of chart my own path. He was the type of art teacher who didn't say, here's an apple in a bowl, I want you to paint that. He really inspired me to do any type of art that I can imagine. And I didn't know until after high school that he's a renowned, nationally recognized artist. He was just all about putting the kids first, and really it was a big influence for me. So, and then my mom and dad both gave me creative freedom to create art. When I was younger, I ripped the carpet out of my floor in my room because I wanted to paint a mural on the floor. And you can't paint a mural on carpet, so, you know, I didn't get in trouble or anything. And I think my dad asked me what it means because it was a big mural, and I think he was like, well, so what does it mean? So I thank them for their support. Okay, so this is taking a little bit of a deeper dive, and I'm going to check time because I promised we'd have, yep, we're good. This is a little deeper dive into the show that is out there right now and what went into it. For the first time, I've only ever balanced just natural stones, things I find or collect, things I get at a garden center, things that botanic gardens have available. But for the first time for this show, I made my own stones. I made my own molds. So I mixed concrete and stone and made these molds. So a lot of the pieces you'll see, I've incorporated some of these elements into the sculptures, which is something very new for me. I also am using living bases, what I'm calling living bases. And there's these old tiles that were stored here at the gardens that kind of have been taken over by nature. They've been kind of forgotten about after a project many years ago. And I went around and collected tons of them. And that's what makes all the bases for all the sculptures. So to me, it's kind of symbolic of the earth. It's kind of a continuation of the earth because these are essentially alive, these bases. They're full of life. You can see this is actually a balance here. I have a big stone balanced up here. And this was the day I balanced it. Keith, photographer here, took this. The day after this very day I balanced these, we saw a butterfly land on one. We saw lizards all over them. We saw, somebody said they saw a squirrel climbing on one. So to me, that's symbolic that nature is accepting, and these pieces fit in, as Tricia mentioned earlier, these pieces fit into the gardens, and that's a really good feeling. And part of that is these living bases, kind of a continuation of the earth up into the balance. So basically, long and short, there's a huge resource pile of stones down there that I would load up. My dad helped me quite a bit. We'd bring a base, set up a base, bring a random assortment of stones, and in the moment, I would create the balance. So Bach Tower gave me total creative freedom, creative license to create in the moment, which was really cool. I got to kind of just be inspired by the surroundings when creating here. So this is a piece I call Balanced in Time. This is at the base of the tower under the sundial. And if you look right at this tiny little point is where this mold that I made and these 12 rocks are balanced. This is about, I think it's about 4 feet, maybe 5 feet, so it's a pretty big balance. And your mind would tell you that this is the exact center of that mold right there. And your mind would tell you that all this extra weight would tip this side down, but in fact, that side is up. And that's one thing that I mentioned earlier about taking a moment and trying to think to yourself, what exactly is happening here? This is one of those circumstances where you would look at this and realized that this weight should be going down there. In fact, it's not. And the reason for that is this angle right there, instead of being flat, it's probably about an 8 or 9 degree angle going from up here to down there. Yeah, and that's what creates the entire equilibrium focus to the left, which allows me to balance the weight. A lot of the weight is going down to this tip, which allows me to counter that weight with these stones and still maintain that middle point. So the equilibrium line of this balance is somewhere about here on the left side of the balance point. It's where the equilibrium line is because of that angle. So it kind of gives you a little insight. Another thing to point out is this is a piece of marble that was used or was cast aside actually. That you can see actual chisel marks from when they shaped this beautiful marble that made this tower. So I'm repurposing some of that old marble there. And the base that it's on is also a big chunk of old marble that they had started to drill into and may have cracked or something. So this is a difficult balance because there's a lot of weight here, and this ground is very soft. As everyone knows, in Florida we have very spongy, and especially after it rains, if you put a rock in your yard, if it's a sizable rock, in a month it'll be about 6 inches lower than where you put it, right? And that happens with balances too, and so they shift often. That's one reason I have to go back and change that angle. So this morning it actually was down, and I changed that angle, and now it's at an angle about like this. It's a steeper angle than you would think is possible, but it's standing there right now, hopefully. Maybe. I got a picture so I can prove it. Here's a few more pieces that I thought were kind of cool and worth noting. This piece here is also at the base of the tower, and this is my kind of dedication piece to Mr. Bach. This is the only piece in the show that's visible from his grave. So I really wanted to do something special for this piece. And when I found this piece of glass, this is a naturally created piece of glass, I really got a feeling of tranquility. The sun was hitting it, and it just gave me this really peaceful feeling. So this work of art is about elevating peace, which Mr. Bach was very much, wanting to do. So, and these are actual dove wings. So there's some symbolism behind this piece. It's a little more than just initially meets the eye. And this piece is unique in that there's a fine point along this edge and a fine point along that edge. And this whole sculpture is balanced on those two fine points. And these are two separate pieces that if you just even jostled a tiny little bit, everything would flop over one way or the other, completely change the balance point. This and all the balances within the show, there is, I'd say, less than 1/8 of an inch play in the movement of any of the pieces to where it would just come crashing down. So that kind of gives you, my art is walking that very fine line of what's possible and what's, if you shift that way, no longer possible. This is another example of that. You would think that the weight of this big block and the weight of this stone would make everything fall off to the right. But because of how it's angled and how this stone is angled slightly this way, I changed my balance point, my equilibrium line to about here. It's not actually straight down from that stone as you would think. So that's kind of interesting. This piece was a lot of fun because it's out on a little island that is chest deep water to get to, that I fell into. And carrying big heavy stones across chest deep water poses its own challenges. But we made a makeshift bridge and got it done. But this is a really interesting piece because all the weight of that side would make you think that everything should be falling this way. But because of where I have it positioned and the angle of the rounded base it's on, it's sitting there. I thought this was an interesting piece because that's at or more than a 45-degree angle, which normally you would not be able to get stone to sit on, but because all of this weight wants to go to the right, it's putting just enough upward force on that stone to keep it on there. So there's more than meets the eye right there, but it looks like it belongs. That one's been there through the whole week. That one hasn't come down. So, and then this piece I thought was cool. I'm trying some new colors and shapes, so each piece kind of carries its own personality, and that was a big goal for this show, was to have each piece kind of be unique. So with this, I think, and I'm pretty confident that a new art form has been created. There are people who balance stones. There are sculptors who cast things in stone molds, but I've never seen, and I did a lot of research, somebody using natural elements and sculptural elements to create art. So I believe a new art form has been born, which is pretty exciting through the show. And that's what I got, guys. Two quick things. There's a Learn How to Balance coming up on October 19th. I'm doing a workshop here. And that's where we can get our hands on. I can show you some of my little tips and tricks. And then throughout the whole show, up until November 30th, every weekend there'll be new works of art based on how many fall. Something new will go up, which hopefully is very little, but there's a good chance you'll see quite a bit of balances anytime you come. And of course, you can learn more in the gift shop, Clock Tower Gardens, and then my art website is ZOTOart.com. So that's all I have. I hope. Thank you. Thank you.